From the moment a girl is born, the world begins shaping her into what it wants her to be. She is told to be polite, to smile, to speak softly, to never make others uncomfortable. Her instincts are tamed, her opinions filtered, her strength disguised as sweetness. She learns that approval is the reward for obedience, and that silence keeps the peace. Slowly, without even realizing it, she begins to bury parts of herself. The wildness, the rage, the hunger for freedom, the need to create and express without fear. This is how the shadow feminine is born. It is not evil or corrupted. It is the collection of all the qualities she was told were too much, too loud, too intense. In the eyes of society, a woman's worth often depends on how well she can suppress herself. The world has long been uncomfortable with the full expression of feminine power, because true feminine energy is not passive. It is dynamic, intuitive, and profoundly creative. It does not simply accept, it transforms. And that kind of power cannot be controlled. So from generation to generation, women have been taught to disconnect from their deeper instincts. They learn to value harmony over honesty, appearance over authenticity, and compliance over courage. Yet inside them, a storm quietly brews, the desire to live fully, to feel deeply, to be seen as whole. Carl Jung understood that whatever we repress becomes the shadow. When a woman is forced to silence her voice, her truth does not disappear. It sinks beneath the surface, waiting for the moment to rise. The shadow carries not only pain but also potential. It holds the fire of her individuality, the strength of her boundaries, the intensity of her love. The problem is that most women fear this shadow because it has been painted as something dark or dangerous. They fear being labeled difficult, emotional, or selfish, so they hide from their power, mistaking their suppression for peace. But peace that depends on self-denial is not peace, it is slow destruction. A woman who suppresses her shadow begins to live half a life. Outwardly, she might look composed, but inwardly she feels a quiet emptiness, a sense that something vital is missing. She might find herself exhausted from always trying to be good, agreeable, and perfect. She might feel resentment building like a quiet flame she dares not acknowledge. She might wake up one day realizing she has been performing instead of living. This disconnection is the first call of the shadow, whispering that it's time to come home to herself. When a woman finally stops running from her inner depths, she begins to see that what she thought was weakness was actually power in disguise. Her sensitivity is not fragility, it is intuition. Her anger is not hatred, it is the soul's demand for justice and respect. Her ambition is not selfish, it is purpose-seeking expression. The shadow feminine is the raw, unfiltered essence of womanhood, the part of her that knows exactly who she is beneath layers of conditioning. When she reclaims it, she stops apologizing for existing. This awakening does not happen overnight. It begins quietly, often through pain or exhaustion, when she realizes that the life she built by following every rule does not fulfill her. She begins to ask questions. She begins to feel. And once she allows herself to feel again, the walls start to crumble. Beneath the polite smile and perfect posture emerges something fierce, something beautiful, something real. She begins to remember that she was never meant to be small. The suppressed feminine does not stay buried forever. It waits patiently, like a seed in the dark, knowing that one day the woman will have the courage to face herself. And when she does, she will discover that her shadow was never her enemy. It was her guide back to her wholeness. In embracing what she once feared, she finally becomes who she was always meant to be, a woman in full possession of her truth, her power, and her light. Within every woman lies a force she's been taught to fear, to silence, or to ignore. It is not the gentle, compliant energy the world applauds. It is her raw, untamed essence, the part that knows what she wants and refuses to apologize for it. This is the shadow feminine, the side of her that carries her deepest instincts, her anger, her passion, her hunger to live fully. For generations, women have been conditioned to repress this power, to trade their authenticity for acceptance. They were told that their fire was dangerous, their confidence was arrogance, their independence was rebellion. But what they were really taught was how to disconnect from their own source of strength. When a woman awakens her shadow, it is not an act of defiance, it is an act of remembrance. It is the moment she stops seeking validation from a world that benefits from her silence. This awakening often begins quietly. It starts when she feels the tension between who she truly is and who she's been pretending to be. She feels it in the exhaustion of always saying yes, in the frustration of always holding back, in the ache that tells her she's living someone else's version of life. Deep inside, something begins to stir, the part of her that remembers she was born to be whole, not perfect. The shadow feminine holds everything she abandoned to be accepted. It holds her untold stories, her unspoken anger, her repressed desires, and her forgotten dreams. Society often labels these emotions as negative, but Jung understood that the shadow is not evil, it is simply the part of the psyche that has been denied. When a woman faces this part of herself, she does not become darker, she becomes freer. Her shadow is not the opposite of her light, it is the doorway to it. This awakening can be unsettling because it demands honesty. It asks her to admit that she has been wearing masks, that she has been shrinking herself to fit into expectations that were never hers to begin with. She starts to question the beliefs that shaped her, beliefs that told her she must be small to be loved, obedient to be respected, pleasing to be safe. The moment she begins questioning these lies, her shadow stirs awake, whispering, "There is more to you than this." The awakening of the shadow feminine is the reclaiming of every emotion she once hid. She begins to express what she truly feels without fear of being called emotional. She allows herself to desire without shame. She allows herself to be angry, not to destroy, but to defend her boundaries and her worth. She stops apologizing for existing in her full intensity, and in doing so she begins to radiate a kind of power that can't be imitated, a presence that commands respect without demanding it. Her awakening doesn't make her cruel, it makes her complete. She learns that embracing her darkness doesn't extinguish her light, it strengthens it. The same energy that once turned inward as pain now becomes her drive to create, to lead, to heal. She becomes more intuitive, more confident, more magnetic. People feel her energy and can't quite explain why she seems so different, so grounded, so alive. It's because she no longer hides behind fear. She has met the parts of herself that once terrified her and found wisdom in them. A woman who has awakened her shadow is not easily controlled. She does not chase love, she attracts it through her authenticity. She does not compete for attention, she becomes the center of her own universe. Her power is not loud, but it is undeniable. It flows through her words, her eyes, her silence. She no longer conforms to the world, she reshapes it. And the most remarkable thing about her transformation is that it doesn't come from becoming someone new. It comes from finally remembering who she's been all along. When a woman awakens her shadow, she becomes unstoppable not because she dominates others, but because she has mastered herself. She has learned that her power was never something to fear, it was something to reclaim. The moment she accepts every part of who she is, she no longer walks through the world seeking approval. She walks with purpose, and the world has no choice but to adjust to her truth. True power does not shout, it does not demand attention, and it does not rely on titles or validation. True power moves in silence, with a kind of calm certainty that unsettles those who live on appearances. Carl Jung understood that authentic power arises when a woman integrates her light and shadow, when she becomes whole within herself. She no longer needs to prove her worth because she knows it. She no longer seeks control because she has mastered self-control. and in that stillness she becomes unshakable. A powerful woman doesn't waste her energy trying to convince others to see her value. She knows that those who are meant to recognize it will, and those who don't are not her concern. Her energy is sacred, and she protects it fiercely. She has learned that silence is not weakness, it is strategy. Silence gives her space to observe, to understand, to choose her response rather than react impulsively. While others rush to be seen and heard, she remains composed, because she knows that real influence is built in patience, not noise. This kind of strength often emerges after she has been broken. It is forged in the fires of disappointment, betrayal, and loss. She has been through moments where she had to rebuild herself from nothing, where she realized that the only person she could truly depend on was herself. Those experiences didn't make her bitter, they made her aware. She learned that survival isn't about fighting everything around you, but mastering everything within you. Her calmness is not naivety, it's the mark of someone who has faced storms and no longer fears the rain. In silence, she studies the world. She sees through manipulation, she senses intention, she reads energy without a word being spoken. Her intuition sharpens because she has learned to listen, to her thoughts, to her emotions, to the quiet voice within that always knows the truth. She no longer allows chaos to pull her off balance. Instead, she observes, learns, and acts only when the moment is right. That's why she always seems to move with precision. To others, it looks like luck, but it's discipline and awareness. People often mistake her calmness for coldness, but she's not detached. She's discerning. She knows when to give, when to walk away, and when to stay still. Her boundaries are clear because she no longer fears being misunderstood. She realizes that protecting her peace is more important than pleasing anyone. This is where her true power lies, not in domination, but in direction. She decides where her energy flows, and that decision shapes her entire reality. Jung would say she has made peace with her shadow. That's why her silence feels so powerful. It is filled with understanding, not repression. Her silence carries the weight of wisdom, earned through reflection. She no longer suppresses her emotions, she channels them. Her anger becomes clarity, her pain becomes purpose, her solitude becomes growth. Each challenge she has faced has taught her something, and now she carries that knowledge like armor. There's something magnetic about a woman who moves in silence. She doesn't chase attention, yet it follows her. She doesn't need to explain herself, yet people listen when she speaks. Her power is not in the noise she makes, but in the presence she holds. When she walks into a room, she doesn't try to dominate it. She simply embodies her truth, and that's enough to shift the energy around her. This is what it means to move in silence and power. It's not about hiding, it's about knowing that your energy speaks louder than words ever could. It's about trusting yourself enough to let time reveal what doesn't need defending. She's learned that the most dangerous thing a woman can become is calm in a world that thrives on her chaos. Because when a woman masters silence, she masters herself, and that is a form of power no one can take away. When a woman awakens her shadow, something profound happens. She begins to see herself as she truly is, not as the world told her to be. For so long, many women are conditioned to be agreeable, gentle, and accommodating, taught to suppress their anger, hide their ambition, and silence their instincts. But when she begins to look within, when she finally confronts the darkness she has avoided all her life, she discovers that those rejected parts of herself were never wrong. They were powerful, waiting to be understood. Jung believed that the shadow is not something evil to destroy, but a natural part of the psyche to integrate. A woman's shadow carries her untamed emotions, her suppressed desires, her raw strength, the parts she had to hide to be accepted. When she faces this inner territory without fear, she realizes that her so-called darkness is actually her depth. It's her capacity to feel deeply, to act boldly, to speak honestly. What society calls rebellion is often her truth trying to breathe. Integration is not a gentle process, it's a rebirth. It begins with discomfort, with realizing how much of her life was shaped by fear and approval-seeking. She starts to recognize how often she said yes when she wanted to say no, how many times she dimmed her light to make others comfortable. Facing her shadow forces her to admit that the enemy was never out there. It was the silence within, but once she admits it, she begins to shift from victim to creator. She stops blaming and starts transforming. That's the moment her real awakening begins. Her anger, once seen as destructive, becomes her compass. It shows her what no longer aligns with her soul. Her jealousy becomes a mirror, revealing what she truly desires. Her fear becomes her guide, pointing toward growth. Instead of fighting her emotions, she listens to them, and in doing so, she gains mastery over herself. She learns that strength isn't about suppressing feelings, but about understanding and channeling them. That is what true emotional intelligence looks like. The merging of heart and mind into awareness. The awakening of her shadow gives her depth. She stops living on the surface, chasing validation, or running from discomfort. She becomes grounded, centered, aware. Her relationships change because she no longer tolerates half-truths or superficiality. She values honesty over harmony, authenticity over approval. This shift might cost her certain people, but it brings her closer to herself, and that's a trade worth making. And once she embraces her shadow, her creativity expands. Jung often said that the shadow holds enormous creative potential because it contains the parts of us we repress. A woman who awakens her shadow gains access to new layers of imagination and expression. She writes, paints, speaks, or leads with a depth that others can feel. Her work begins to carry soul because it comes from integration, not imitation. People sense her authenticity because she's no longer performing, she's embodying. But most importantly, awakening her shadow sets her free. She's no longer manipulated by guilt or fear, no longer afraid of being too much or not enough. She understands that both light and darkness exist within her, and that wholeness is found not by choosing one over the other, but by accepting both. That acceptance gives her peace that cannot be shaken by external chaos. So when a woman awakens her shadow, nothing can stop her, because she's no longer fighting herself. Her power flows effortlessly because it's aligned with truth. She's no longer trying to be perfect, she's becoming real. And there is nothing more unstoppable, more magnetic, more divine than a woman who stands fully in the light of her darkness and calls it her own. When a woman integrates her shadow, her energy changes in ways the world can't ignore. Before this awakening, she might have lived split between who she truly is and who she was taught to be. She tried to please, to fit in, to stay small because that's what society rewards. A version of her that is polished, predictable, and safe. But when she finally embraces the parts she once feared, the anger, the ambition, the unapologetic truth, she becomes magnetic. People may not understand what's changed, but they feel it. There's an undeniable power in a woman who no longer hides any part of herself. Carl Jung taught that what we repress doesn't disappear, it waits. The shadow is not destroyed through denial, it grows stronger. But once a woman acknowledges it, a surge of energy returns to her. All the life force she spent suppressing her emotions, controlling her image, and managing others' perceptions now becomes available to her. She begins to move through the world with ease and authenticity. She doesn't try to control outcomes or people anymore. She simply embodies her truth. That embodiment draws the right experiences to her without effort. The energy shift is subtle but profound. Her voice carries more weight, not because she's louder, but because she speaks from integration. Her presence feels grounded. She doesn't rush or perform. She's no longer desperate for validation or afraid of rejection. Instead, she radiates a quiet confidence that comes from self-acceptance. Others sense her boundaries even when she doesn't speak them. She doesn't need to demand respect. It naturally orbits around her. This is the energetic authority that emerges when a woman becomes whole. In Jungian psychology, integration releases psychic energy that was trapped in repression. This energy expresses itself as vitality, intuition, and creativity. That's why an awakened woman often becomes deeply intuitive. Her inner compass sharpens because she's no longer suppressing her instincts. She senses what's real, what's aligned, what's false. Her decisions flow from inner clarity rather than external noise. She stops second-guessing herself because she's learned to trust her own depth. Her relationships also begin to shift. Some people fall away, unable to handle her truth. Others are drawn closer, inspired by her authenticity. She no longer seeks approval, so she becomes freer in love. She can give without losing herself, care without clinging, connect without pretending. The energy she once wasted on pretending now nourishes her growth, and that growth becomes contagious. Her presence challenges others to meet her at the same level of honesty. Spiritually, her frequency rises. When she integrates her shadow, she stops fighting duality. She accepts that light and dark coexist within her, that pain can coexist with peace, that vulnerability can coexist with power. This acceptance creates inner harmony, and harmony radiates outward as strength. Her aura feels stable, magnetic, alive. People feel safe around her because she's safe within herself. She's no longer reacting to life, she's creating it. And perhaps the most beautiful part is that she no longer fears her own power. Before, power felt dangerous because she associated it with domination or ego. But now, she sees that true power is balance. It's the ability to stay centered no matter what life throws her way. She understands that her strength doesn't have to be loud. It can be soft, steady, and deeply rooted. This is why, when a woman integrates her shadow, the energy around her transforms. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about returning to who she's always been beneath the conditioning. The world feels her energy shift, even if it can't explain it. She no longer seeks light outside herself. She's become the source. That's the essence of Jungian transformation. When the unconscious becomes conscious, a woman becomes unstoppable. When a woman awakens her shadow, she begins to radiate a power that doesn't need validation. This power doesn't come from dominance or rebellion. It comes from alignment. For the first time in her life, she is not split between who she is and who she pretends to be. The war within her ends, and in its place rises something serene, grounded, and unshakable. Carl Jung believed that true strength comes from wholeness, not perfection. When a woman accepts both her light and darkness, her confidence becomes rooted, her presence becomes magnetic, and her life begins to unfold in profound harmony. Before this awakening, she may have spent years running from her emotions, hiding her pain behind a smile, apologizing for her anger, minimizing her brilliance so others wouldn't feel small. She might have mistaken people-pleasing for kindness and silence for peace. But these patterns were never peace. They were survival. Her awakening begins when she grows tired of pretending. When she decides that she would rather be real than liked, she steps into her shadow, and what she finds there is not a monster, but a mirror, a reflection of her power that has been waiting patiently to be acknowledged. As she integrates her shadow, her energy becomes steady and centered. She no longer reacts from insecurity or fear of rejection. She doesn't need to prove anything or chase anyone. Her worth is no longer a question, it's a truth. This kind of confidence is rare because it isn't performative. It's silent, calm, and deeply felt. People sense it. They can feel the difference between a woman trying to be powerful and a woman who simply is. Jung said that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is what happens when she claims her shadow. The confidence she exudes is not arrogance, it's self-ownership. She has looked at her flaws, her past, her mistakes, and embraced them. She no longer runs from her story. She no longer seeks redemption through others' approval. Every experience, even her most painful ones, have become part of her wisdom. Her wounds are not weaknesses anymore. They are symbols of survival, proof that she can fall and rise again. Her boundaries strengthen naturally. She doesn't need to explain herself or justify her no's. The energy of self-respect is loud without a word. She attracts people who resonate with her truth and repels those who thrive on her uncertainty. The more she accepts her shadow, the less she tolerates situations that diminish her. This isn't because she's cold or distant, it's because she finally knows her value. And knowing her value changes everything. Her presence transforms. She enters a room and the energy subtly shifts. Not because she's trying to dominate it, but because her energy is complete. She no longer hides parts of herself in fear of judgment. Her confidence is born from integration, from the understanding that she can be fierce and gentle, soft and strong, light and dark, all at once. That paradox gives her depth and authenticity. And as she continues to grow, she realizes that her true strength doesn't come from fighting or controlling. It comes from surrendering to her full self. The confidence that emerges from that surrender cannot be shaken by failure, rejection, or loneliness. It's an internal flame that doesn't depend on circumstance. This is why, when a woman awakens her shadow, her confidence becomes unstoppable. She's no longer living through borrowed identities or borrowed dreams. She moves from her essence, her intuition, her soul. And when a woman walks in her truth, the world adjusts. She doesn't chase opportunities, they come to her. She doesn't seek validation, she gives it to herself. She doesn't fear the dark anymore, because she has become the light within it. When a woman awakens her shadow, she steps into a destiny that no longer depends on the outside world. Her strength no longer comes from approval, her happiness no longer comes from circumstances, and her sense of identity no longer comes from how others see her. This is the point of true transformation. The stage Jung described as individuation, where a woman becomes whole, undivided, and fully herself. She stops living as a reflection of others' expectations and begins to live as the expression of her own truth. In the early stages of life, most people build their identity around what the world rewards. A woman learns that being good means being agreeable, being successful means being perfect, and being feminine means being small, delicate, and contained. But this is not the woman's soul speaking, it's conditioning. Beneath that conditioning lies her real essence, the wild, intuitive, creative self that has been silenced for too long. When she awakens her shadow, she meets this essence again, and that reunion feels like coming home after years of exile. At first, this transformation feels chaotic. She may feel lost because she's shedding layers of false identity. But this confusion is not failure, it's rebirth. The woman who is awakening her shadow must first unlearn who she thought she was. She begins to see that the rules she once obeyed were never hers to begin with. The voice telling her to be quiet, to be nice, to stay in line. That voice was not her intuition. It was fear, inherited from generations of suppressed power. Once she recognizes it, she begins to break the pattern. She learns to sit with her darkness instead of running from it. She allows the pain to speak, the anger to express, the grief to release, and through this process, something incredible happens. Clarity emerges. She begins to hear her soul's voice again, the voice that says, "You were never broken. You were only hiding." Her strength returns not because she's now fearless, but because she's willing to face her fears. The woman who integrates her shadow no longer needs to be perfect, she only needs to be whole. This wholeness brings with it a deep peace, the kind that cannot be shaken by chaos. She realizes that she doesn't need to control life to feel safe. She doesn't need to chase love to feel worthy. Everything she needs, wisdom, love, strength, was inside her all along, buried beneath the layers of shame and self-doubt. When she finally reclaims it, she becomes luminous. She moves through life with intention instead of reaction. Her choices are aligned. Her words carry truth. Her actions carry power. Jung taught that integrating the shadow brings access to the self, the highest, most conscious version of who we are. This is what happens to her. She becomes a vessel for something larger than the ego. Her life begins to feel guided, not by external pressure but by inner knowing. She no longer asks, "What will people think?" but rather, "What does my soul need?" This question changes everything, and this is where her unstoppable power emerges. Because when a woman begins to live from herself, nothing outside her can truly harm her. Failure doesn't destroy her, it teaches her. Loneliness doesn't define her, it refines her. Even pain becomes sacred because she understands its purpose. She has become the alchemist of her own life, turning every shadow into light. This is what it means for a woman to awaken her shadow. She doesn't just reclaim her hidden emotions, she reclaims her entire being. She moves beyond survival into creation, beyond conformity into freedom, beyond fear into purpose. And when she reaches this state, no one and nothing can stop her, because the world can only control those who are asleep, and she, finally, is awake. When a woman awakens her shadow, she becomes the embodiment of wholeness. She no longer runs from her fears or hides her emotions behind masks of perfection. Instead, she welcomes every part of herself, the soft and the fierce, the light and the dark, and in doing so, she becomes free. This freedom is not loud or rebellious, it is calm, radiant, and magnetic. The world feels her presence because it comes from truth, not performance. Carl Jung believed that the path to enlightenment is not through denial of darkness, but through its integration. When a woman lives by this wisdom, she stops fighting herself and starts flowing with life. Her intuition deepens, her purpose clarifies, and her confidence becomes unshakable. She is no longer shaped by external forces, she shapes her own destiny. This is the secret power of the awakened feminine. She doesn't seek permission to exist, she simply rises, rooted in the fullness of who she is. Her light is brighter because it has known darkness, and her strength is deeper because it was born from struggle. Such a woman cannot be stopped, for she is not chasing power. She is power, embodied in its purest, most conscious form.